Throughout history, humanity has devised countless ways to punish the condemned. Amongst the most terrifying and psychologically harrowing was immurement, the act of enclosing a person within walls or a confined space, often leaving them to die slowly from thirst, starvation, or asphyxiation. While less known than the gallows or the guillotine, immurement was not merely a literary horror or a mythological device. It was a real, legally sanctioned method of execution used across cultures and centuries. Immurement, from the Latin immuri, to wall in, involved placing the victim inside a small or enclosed space, such as a coffin, a room, or behind a brick wall, without the means of escaping. Unlike live burial, where soil is used to cover a person, immurement kept the person in an above-ground structure, sealed within stone, brick, or wood. Death came not instantly, but slowly, sometimes over days. The horror of immurement lay in its drawn-out nature. Victims remained conscious for hours, even days, depending on their strength and the size of their prison. The confined space offered no food, water, or air circulation. Many likely died from dehydration, though some suffocated first. Occasionally a small hole was left to allow a final confession or air, but even this was just temporary. Immurement wasn't just an execution, it was a prolonged, claustrophobic, psychological torture. The earliest known references to immurement stretch back to ancient worlds. In Mesopotamia, there are records of people being sealed inside walls as divine punishment. Some archaeological discoveries from the region suggest human remains intentionally placed within wall cavities, though whether for ritual or punishment remains debated. The Romans too practiced a form of immurement. The Vestal Virgins, priestesses sworn to chastity, held great status in Roman society, but if one broke her vow of celibacy, she was buried alive. Roman law prohibited the spilling of a Vestal Virgin's blood, so the punishment had to be bloodless. The condemned woman was placed in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water, ostensibly so the state could claim she had not been directly killed. After being lowered into the chamber, the entrance was then sealed up, and she was left to die alone in the dark. In medieval Europe, immurement took on a more judicial tone. It was often used against heretics or women accused of infidelity or transgressions against religious vows. The practice was especially associated with monastic orders. Nuns who violated their oaths of chastity or obedience could be condemned to spend the rest of their lives immured inside small cells, often attached to the convent walls. Some lived for years in this way, fed sparingly through a small window, but others, well, they were simply left to die. In Eastern Europe, particularly in Orthodox Christian regions, immurement was occasionally imposed as both penance and punishment. A striking case comes from a 17th century monastery in Moldavia. Here a nun was reportedly found to have become pregnant. Rather than face public shame, she was immured behind the chapel walls, with only a small slit for food or prayer. She survived for several years before succumbing to illness and starvation. Her cell remained a dark, visible warning to the other sisters. There are numerous tales, some rather apocalyptic, of priests, monks or nuns being walled into monasteries or churches as punishment for spiritual transgression. These stories serve to reinforce religious orthodoxy and the consequences of defying ecclesiastical authority. In the Islamic world, immurement was rare, but also was documented on occasions. Persian records describe instances in which high-ranking women, particularly wives or concubines suspected of adultery, were sealed into chambers to die, especially if the dishonour was perceived as threatening dynastic legitimacy. In the Mongol Empire, immurement became a tool of wrath. Genghis Khan is believed to have ordered the immurement of enemy leaders as both punishment and example. In one case, a noble who betrayed the Khan was sealed inside of a box and left exposed to the elements, where he died of thirst and heat exhaustion. India provides some of the most chilling accounts of immurement. In certain parts of medieval India, royal servants or attendants were sometimes immured alive within the walls of a temple or palace during construction. This was not punishment, but instead ritual sacrifice, believed to bring good fortune or spiritual protection to the building. Human remains found in ancient Indian temple walls do support this grim tradition. Similarly, in Southeast Asia, including Cambodia and Thailand, some legends and temple lore describe victims being placed inside stone walls as offerings to spirits or gods. Whether myth or reality, the stories reflect a cultural association between immurement and a sacred space. Beyond historical records, immurement appears frequently in folklore and myth. The Albanian ballad of Razafa, a young woman, is walled into a castle to ensure its foundations remain stable. Her only request is that one breast be left exposed so she can nurse her infant son. Though fictional, the tale reflects a broader cultural memory of immurement as both sacrifice and tragedy. Bram Stoker's Dracula makes reference to a female vampire being walled in as punishment for her sins. Gothic fiction in general has embraced the horror of immurement, perhaps because it represents a deep primal fear, being trapped alone with no escape. One of the last known judicial uses of immurement occurred in 15th century Germany. A woman named Agnes Bernauer, the mistress of Duke Albert III of Bavaria, was accused of witchcraft by the Duke's father. Though no evidence existed, she was condemned to death. Rather than beheaded or drowned, she was thrown into a chamber and the entrance bricked up. This method ensured her suffering was prolonged and kept her death technically outside the bounds of noble bloodshed laws. In Poland and parts of Central Europe, city statutes from the 13th to 16th centuries included provisions for immuring thieves and women accused of infidelity or termination. These cases were public, grim spectacles. Crowds would watch as the condemned were placed into chambers and then the final bricks laid. Immurment's enduring power lies not just in the physical suffering it caused, but in the psychological torment. The condemned locked in darkness would face panic, madness, and ultimately death in solitude. The method blended execution with a form of psychological torture long before such terms existed. Unlike swift execution by sword or gallows, immurement was about isolation, cutting someone off from the world and letting death arrive slowly. It mirrored the worst fears of early humanity: confinement, silence, and helplessness. In many ways, it was a form of erasure. Victims were not just killed, they were hidden away, sealed off, denied the dignity of a visible death or grave. In monastic settings, immurement symbolised both damnation and atonement. In political settings, it represented total defeat. While less frequently discussed than burning or hanging, immurement was amongst one of the most chilling forms of execution ever devised. Across cultures from Rome to India, from medieval convents to Moldavan monasteries, it reflected not only the cruelty, but a belief in punishment through isolation and denial. Today, immurement exists primarily in the realm of legend and horror fiction, but its real-world use, documented in legal records, ballads and archaeological remains, reveals a past far more gruesome and imaginative than we often admit. As a tool of religious discipline, political vengeance, or architectural superstition, immurement stands as one of the most haunting and inhumane forms of execution. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please click subscribe down below, and once again, thank you so much for watching.